Hello. In this short heavy job training video, you will learn how to use employee attendance codes to distinguish between the worked and non-worked hours on the time cards. As you've already learned, it is extremely critical to Granite's future to report these hours separately to avoid any false claim issues when billing owners for hours worked. In this video, we will explore 3 different scenarios and learn how to correctly enter hours and attendance codes in both the Heavy Job Manager field time cards and the Heavy Job mobile time cards. The use of attendance codes in Heavy Job is not new to Granite. We have been using them for years. However, it is now more important than ever to use these attendance codes correctly and always separate worked hours and non-worked hours. Once you know how to properly use attendance codes, you can apply them to any worked, non-worked situation. The first scenario that we'll look at is the foreman hour or other agreements for time not worked. For many Granite locations, our foremen are paid extra time to perform their foreman duties. These duties include filling out time cards, recording safety meetings, inspections, and planning for upcoming work. In almost all situations, as long as the extra time is actually work, it can be included in an owner billing. However, if any of this time is not worked, it must be designated as not worked using an attendance code. The attendance code for foreman non-work time or other agreements for non-work time is the letter N. Let's take a look at how this would be entered on a time card. I have a simple time card where the employee has 8 hours total, 4 hours under each of 2 cost codes. In order to pay the typical foreman hour, I would add an hour of overtime, depending on your location, for that foreman hour on one or more of the cost codes. So you can see on the right-hand side that my total is 8 hours of regular time, 1 hour of overtime, and that 1 hour of overtime is what we normally refer to as the foreman hour. If for any reason, any part of that foreman hour was not worked, let's say that it only took the foreman 30 minutes to fill out his time card and record safety, and he got in his truck and went home. He still gets paid the hour, but it has to be recorded as non-work time. For that scenario, you would have the 4, you would have the slash, and it would be 0.5 for the time worked, and then you would enter the attendance code N for non-worked hours and the other 0.5 hours. The result on the right-hand side is exactly the same, 8 hours of regular time, 1 hour of overtime, but the system, because of the attendance codes, knows the difference between the half hour of work foreman time and the half hour of non-worked foreman time, designated with the N code. Notice the total on the far right-hand side of the time card. In the Heavy Job Manager system or the Heavy Job Field system, the laptop version, this total is accounted for hours. It's a total of all worked and non-worked hours. It's important to note that this is different in the mobile app, and we'll go look at that right now. In the exact same scenario on the mobile time card, we'll start with the foreman with 8 hours under 2 cost codes, and we're going to make the change to record the same situation, a half hour of work foreman time and a half hour of non-worked foreman time. I'll put that on the second cost code, so I'll tap on that second cost code. I'll enter the 4 hours for the worked hours. Then in the overtime rate, I'll enter the 0.5 for the worked overtime. So I'll tap on the attendance non-use button, and then I'll select the N for the foreman non-work code, and then add the 0.5 hours and say done. And now this is where you really need to look at the right-hand side of this time card, because in the mobile system, it only shows worked hours, not all hours for the total. So I have 8 hours of regular time worked and 0.5 hours of overtime work. The N.5 overtime hours, the non-worked hours, are not shown in that total. In addition to the foreman hour just discussed, the N non-worked attendance code could be used for any non-worked hours. So if there were individual agreements with employees, like guaranteed 40 hours, and they had worked 32 hours that week and rained out, and they were going to get paid for the other 8 hours, the non-worked hours would be recorded in either system with the N preceding it. So it would be N8 in that example. So the N is for any non-worked hours, including any of the foreman time that is truly not work. Let's look at the second scenario. This one is shift pay. Depending on the location and labor agreements, there are typically two methods of adjusting pay for non-standard shifts. The first is where the employee labor rate is higher for a non-standard shift. In this scenario, the shift is entered on the time card as 2, 3, or 4, and the rate is adjusted in our accounting system. In the HeavyJob Manager system, that shift code is in the top right corner of the time card, and you would just click in there, highlight the existing shift 1 and change it to a 2, change it to a 3, change it to a 4. Typically, the shifts are regulated by the labor agreements, and a second shift means there's a dedicated second shift, 2 shifts working. Third shift, there's a dedicated third shift. And shift 4 is typically used for locations that use a special single shift. And so it's up to the foreman to enter that shift code correctly to account for non-standard shifts. The other shift scenario is when an employee works a certain number of hours but is paid for additional time to compensate for the shift work. For example, some labor agreements call for working 7.5 hours and paid 8 for a shift, or working 7 hours and getting paid 8. This is an example of a worked, not worked that would require an attendance code. The attendance code we use for this shift adjustment is the letter F. So in my time card example, if I were working at a location where I got a shift adjustment, I would enter the worked hours. I'll change this to 3 hours work, and then I'll put in the adjustment F1. And you can see the total on the right-hand side counted for and will be paid for 8 hours, but 7 hours are worked and 1 hour was non-worked shift adjustment. Looking at the same operation on the mobile time card, I will tap on the 4 hours, change the 4 to 3, tap on the attendance non-use code button, and add my shift adjust code F, and then add the extra hour, and done. If you look at the total on the right-hand side of the time card, there are 7 worked hours accounted for. The shift adjust non-worked hours, the F1 hours, are not included in the total on the right-hand side of the time card. Also on the mobile system, if this were the first scenario where it was just a shift rate adjustment, the foreman would come down in the shift box on the lower right corner, tap on the box, and select the appropriate shift code to indicate that that was a non-standard shift. The third scenario for attendance codes that we'll talk about today is one called Shape Up. Shape Up is another example of adjusting an employee's pay by adding non-worked hours. It's typically part of a labor agreement where an employee's hours are adjusted to bring their total to a certain number, depending on their actual work time. For example, if an employee worked 6 hours and then was sent home due to weather or for some other reason, the labor agreement might state that they get paid for 8 hours. The 2 non-worked hours must be designated on the time card using an attendance code. We use the letter P for shape up hours. In my HeavyJob Manager field system example, I would change the 4 hours to 2 hours, and that would be the 6 worked hours for the employee. And then I would use the attendance code P for the other 2 hours. So you can see on the right-hand side again, I have a total of 8 accounted for hours. Looking at the individual cost codes, I have 4 hours worked, and then 2 hours worked, and 2 hours of shape-up time. The shape-up time can vary from location to location and labor agreement to labor agreement, but it is typically designed to an employee's total hours to a certain number based on what they've already worked. Worked 2, get paid 4, worked 4, get paid 8, whatever that is for that location. If we look at the same thing on the mobile time card, I'll take the employee with the 4 hours on the second cost code. I'll change that to 2 hours of worked time. I'll add the attendance non-use code P for shape-up hours and add the 2 hours of shape-up time. Say done. If you look to the right of the mobile time card, you'll see the worked hours indicated as 6, and the P2, the shape-up 2 hours, is not included in that total. This concludes the training video for the HeavyJob attendance codes for worked and non-worked hours. Using these examples that we've shown here today, you should be able to apply the same principle to any attendance code that you have in your system. Every location may have a slightly different group of attendance codes, but generally speaking, the worked hours go to the left of the attendance code, the non-worked hours to the right of the attendance code, and every location should have a cheat sheet available that shows you which codes are set up for that location so that you can apply this training to any situation. Thank you.